Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
St. Thomas Aquinas argued that essentially he used the word inclination. We all know what an incline is. An incline is like a hill. If a ball is on an incline, what's going to happen to the ball? It's going to roll down. It will naturally go down. The ball naturally has an inclination, and that inclination is to go down. And this incline, the ball is inclined to go down. Same way with the human being. The human being has certain inclinations that if left to itself, the human being would do certain things. What are some of those things that Aquinas said that we would do as human beings? He said that humans are inclined, we naturally move toward fundamental values or goods. So that, for instance, one thing that human beings are going to move toward is preserving themselves. Should we just try an example? Deacon John, do you want to stand up and just fall over onto the floor without protecting yourself? We're going to do that? The natural inclination when I fall over is for me to do something about that. We don't just fall over and allow ourselves to hit the ground. We have a natural instinct to protect ourselves. Any time that we need to protect ourselves physically or psychologically, someone calls me a name or says something bad about me, what's the first thing that I have? To preserve myself. To preserve myself. So Aquinas was pointing this out 700, nearly 800 years ago, that we have this inclination to preserve ourselves, to protect ourselves. That was the first one that he noted, how it was that we have this inclination to preserve our lives and to protect ourselves. Think about it. By making a living, why do you go to work every day? Why do you go make a living? You still haven't figured that out. I have a feeling it's because of wanting to preserve yourself. The going to work is better than the alternatives, right? We're inclined to preserve ourselves rather than to starve and to be homeless and not knowing where the next meal is coming from. There's something good about working that causes us to go there every day. So the four inclinations that we have as human beings, the first one is to preserve ourselves. The second one is to procreate. Have you ever noticed how it is that humans keep having babies? Or other animals too? Rabbits. They just keep having other rabbits, right? That various species not only preserve and protect themselves, but they also procreate. They have an instinct toward reproduction. The third inclination that we have, if human beings are like that ball that naturally goes towards a certain place, human beings not only have this inclination to preserve themselves and to procreate, but also to be social. The introverts among us would disagree. Introverts are more quiet people. But essentially, Thomas Aquinas is saying, from the moment that you're born, you're in relationship. Think about that. Right? You're in relationship with your mother, parents, siblings, friends, neighbors, even before that. You are the result of a relationship. And then the fourth inclination, according to Aquinas, in the 13th century, is an inclination toward knowledge and truth. Simply meaning, did you ever notice how human beings are curious? And they want to know certain things? And that knowledge, that desire to know is another inclination. We want to know things. Which is why Jayme is so popular, right? We want to know. And Aristotle, a lot of these ideas he's getting from Aristotle, because St. Thomas Aquinas read Aristotle's Metaphysics, and the first line of Aristotle's Metaphysics says, all people, to use a more contemporary term, by their nature desire to know. All people desire to know. And so we ask questions and we want to know the truth.
Yeah, but to know to a certain extent.
Say more.
Because if I ask you something and then you tell me the answer to it, I have the opportunity to accept it and go on and think that I know this. And if I know it, then that's it, that's done for. And then go on to something else and pick up something else that I think I need to know. So I'll ask you that. But if I don't ask you more about the first thing, do you see what I'm saying?
Or do further investigation.
Yeah,
To find out more.
And also, when we hear something, it has to fit with what we believe, right? If I tell you that the earth is not round, that the earth is square, you're going to compare that to everything that you've learned before and say, wait a minute, I learned that the earth is round, etc. I can't believe Father when he's saying that the earth is square. Right? It has to fit with what you know, otherwise it causes kind of... So we have this desire to know and to keep knowing. Karl Rahner would later say that we are transcendent, meaning that when we know something, are we satisfied with that? No. We always want to go beyond that. And we learn something new, and that creates more questions, and we just keep going. So, for St. Thomas Aquinas then, this natural law then is, the principle of natural law is that we as human beings preserve and promote all of those values specified by these natural inclinations. That we need, these are the things that are more important than anything to human beings. So anything that's in accord with these is good. Anything that goes against these is bad. Let's use the example of the first one, to preserve oneself. If human beings have this natural inclination to preserve themselves, then I have a natural inclination to preserve myself. Anything I do that doesn't preserve myself is bad. Follow me? If I try to commit suicide, bad. That's not preserving yourself. If I'm into cutting, right? A large number of teenagers, especially girls, are into self-mutilation. Okay, that's bad. Smoking. I smoke 3 packs a day. Bad. It goes against self-preservation. How we judge if something's good or bad, according to natural law, then, is whether it promotes these values or goes against, contradicts those values. To contradict the natural inclination to preserve oneself, then, or commit suicide, say, is immoral because it goes against that. To not take care of your health or to engage in risky behavior, to do drugs, to self-mutilate, to engage in reckless driving, yikes, it's immoral. Why? Because it goes against this value. That's natural law. So interesting, because divine law, on the one hand, divine law are things that we find in the Bible. The divine law in the Bible, thou shalt not kill. That's divine law. We're not talking about divine law here. We're talking about natural law. It's not, we don't kill one another because God says, thou shalt not kill. The reason is because we as human beings are inclined, have this natural inclination to preserve ourselves. And that's why we don't kill ourselves or others. Which leads us to the second principle then of natural law ethics, that we shouldn't stand in the way of others in their pursuit of their own self-preservation or of these values. So if someone else is trying to preserve his or her life or his or her health, we shouldn't do anything that stands in the middle of that. Right? In many ways, we could tie it back to the golden rule, that we all heard the golden rule. Do unto others as what? You would have them do unto you. That's something that Jesus was the first person in the world to say, right? Actually, how interesting. What Mizzoni says in his book is that this golden rule, we can find in so many different cultures, as he outlined here. In Confucianism, never do unto others what you would not like them to do to you. 5 centuries before Jesus. Buddhism, hurt not others with that which pains you. If it causes you pain, don't cause that pain to someone else. Jainism, which is in modern-day India, we should regard all creatures as we regard our own self, and should therefore refrain from inflicting upon others such injury as would be undesirable to us if inflicted upon ourselves. If something's going to cause you injury, then don't do that to someone else. Zoroastrianism of the Middle East, do not do unto others all that which is not well for yourself. Plato, paganism, may I do to others as I would that they should do unto me. Hinduism, do not do other which if done to you would cause you pain. I think that's do not do to another which if done to you would cause you pain. Judaism, what is hateful to yourself, don't do to your fellow human being. Jesus, in everything you do, do to others what you would have them do to you. That's essentially what we know as the golden rule. So how it is that various cultures then have this golden rule, treat others as you would want them to treat you. And so, for instance, in these natural values that we're inclined to, they're inclined to preserve and protect themselves, okay, let them do that in the same way that they let you do that yourself. Okay, other applications of the principles of natural law. So we talked about preserving life. Let's go to number 2, procreation, because if there are any good Catholics in this room who were Catholic before the 1960s, you're going to know where I'm coming from here, right? All our bishops and priests before the 1960s were trained in natural law, which means that when it comes to things like procreation, sex, this is where they got their ideas. That we should perform actions that promote procreation and avoid actions that destroy or contradict our inclination toward sexual reproduction. That is to say, this inclination toward procreation is to have children. What is marriage for? Said the church before the 1960s, and continues to say the Roman Church today. What is marriage for? To have children. Why were you married? Got news for you. To have children. Okay then? What does that mean for persons who can't have children for whatever reason? Right? For persons who are barren or sterile. For persons who are past the childbearing age, should they not get married? You follow me?
But they didn't take the law to themselves. I mean, they didn't want to have kids. I'm talking about the Catholic priests, they don't marry.
Let's come back to that. You're onto something here. So if this is a value, procreation, then why aren't Catholic priests in the Roman Church getting married and having kids? They're doing something that's contrary to nature, contrary to their inclination, which probably is why it resulted in the sex scandal that hit the Roman Church in 2002. It's a human inclination, these sexual desires. So if we as human beings are inclined, if we have this inclination, this natural inclination, the ball has a natural inclination to go down. As human beings, we have an inclination to preserve and protect ourselves and to procreate. Let's go back to the 1960s. 1968, 1969, when Pope Pius VI came out with Humanae Vitae, it was against artificial birth control. Okay, we all know what artificial birth control is. Condoms, or the birth control pill. Why was he against that in the 1960s? Trained as a good scholastic philosopher, theologian. Why was he against that? Because if you're going to have sex, it's for one reason. And what's that reason? Procreate. And if you're going to have sex, newsflash, this is the 1960s, if you're going to have sex, you have to be open to the possibility of procreation. You cannot have sex and not be open to having kids. You cannot have sex with a condom, because then you're not open to procreation, which is your natural inclination as a human being.
But where does it stand on vasectomy and hysterectomy? I mean, we don't hear very much
Good.
about that.
Thank you for bringing up
We don't hear about it. It's only-
Is it natural? No, you're going against nature. God created you with those things for one reason. What was it, Mario?
To have children. To
Have
reproduce.
kids.
Okay.
So when you have a tubal ligation, you are going against this natural inclination according to scholastic theology. You follow me? Before the 1960s, this was the theology of the Catholic Church in the West, of the Roman Church, and of all of its...
A lot of people that protest at the clinic is mostly about women. They never go to where doctors doing vasectomy. I mean,
Seems to be a contradiction. So, you're on to something. For our sake right now, we're simply focusing on these values, these fundamental goods that we are inclined to. The church for years said that we are inclined to procreate, so anything you do that gets in the middle of that is bad. The other examples that we have here are sterilization. Thanks for bringing up issues like that. Homosexual activity. I'm sorry, but if you're going to have sex with a person, you've got to be creating children through that sex. Right? Masturbation. Put your hands above the blanket when you sleep. That's what we have to. That's what our young seminarians were taught, right? when the rector passed, this is before my time, but the old priests would tell stories of how when they all slept in the same hall, in the same dormitory, right? When the rector passed through, the boys had to have their hands on top of the bed. Why? Because otherwise they're going contrary to nature. Because read your Bibles. If you spill your seed, says the Bible, then that seed was not able to create the baby that it was meant to create. It was meant for procreation. See the thought of the church for 700 years, Sierra?
So this tells me we're being reduced down to animals, for only for procreating. Like we're being reduced down to our biological parts, and we should only, I mean, that's a bad thing.
We do see some other parts that are more than our biological parts, that we're social, that we're knowledgeable, but right now we're just focused on biological parts. And that when we have sex, it's meant for one reason.
Well, the social
It's not
can
meant
be
for
tied into
pleasure or
procreation.
union. What?
The social can be tied into procreation, kind of, like we are social beings, so we need to, I mean, that's gonna be tied in later about we need to only, I mean, like heteronormativity or being heterosexual has a function so that we have children. Because we need bodies, or everything is about passing on genes, survival of genes,
Okay.
biology.
I'm not sure where you're going, but it's very dangerous what you're saying. I mean, I'm like, could someone start the fire so in case we need to burn anyone at the stage? Because what I hear you saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, I'm focused here on procreation. If you're going to have sex, it needs to be open to having kids. Got news for you. Gay sex, there are no kids coming out of it. If you know enough about biology, there are no kids coming out of gay sex. And any argument that you make, Sierra, about that being social or something about bringing people together in a relationship, no. Sex, I have news for you, is about having kids and procreating. Period. That was the message of the church. 700 years, natural law, in the same way that the ball has a natural inclination, we have a natural inclination, which is to procreate. I think you're right. It's about the uniting of various biological parts, and when those parts are united, this has to result. Or the possibility of this has to result. Since the 1960s, many people have had a problem with this. Why do 98% of sexually active Roman Catholic women, according to the Pew Research Center, why do they use birth control if the church has said that it is wrong and evil? Why? Because obviously they have a problem with this.
We're going by human.
I assume they have a problem with this.
Human decision, not just.
Dulce?
Pero en la iglesia romana, ¿verdad? A la mujer le hacen creer, o nos hacen creer, que nosotros no podemos cortar eso de la procreación.
That we can't cut off procreation. Women, she says women, especially in Mexico, are taught that they can't cut off procreation. Like in what way?
Porque es pecado, dice. Y ya no podemos arrimarnos a comulgar, no podemos arrimarnos a nada.
Right.
O sea, está hablando de la romana, ¿verdad?
If you're having sex, got news for you, according to this theology, if you're having sex and someone pulls out, then you've just committed a sin. You're no longer open to procreation.
But if you're not having sex in a marriage or something, you're also sinning, right?
Oh yes, if you're not having marriage, so this is how we were raised as Catholics. You're following? If we had sex outside of marriage, this is marriage, this is sex. If sex is happening outside of marriage, then it is a sin. Why? Because it's not marriage. The institution of marriage is for the reason of procreation, said the church for many centuries, which meant that if you were having sex outside of marriage, that was a grave evil. Even when I was a child, it was scandalous for a young lady to be pregnant outside of marriage. It was scandalous.
Oh yeah, that's the next leg of it, is that men and women, well, women, if they have sex outside of marriage and they get pregnant, obviously they're pregnant. But if the man has sex outside of marriage, good for him. Then it's tied into different social expectations, etc.
And he moves on, whereas she is strapped with this burden of having to decide, about the future of that life, and the Catholic Church has always come down on the side of preserving and protecting life, the life of others, which means it becomes, we enter a sticky thicket. Let's move on from procreation now.
Thank you.
Should we go to the social? All of this simply to say that according to natural law ethics then, we as human beings have a certain inclination, in the same way that the ball has an inclination to follow a certain path, right? We are inclined to do four things. One of them is to preserve our lives, one is to procreate, another is to be social, which simply means that we can't do anything that damages our relationships, our social fabric here. Oh, okay. That one was less controversial, right? So what happens when I lie? When I lie, what's happening is I'm damaging those social relationships. That's bad. According to natural ethics, why is it bad? Because it goes against our social nature. We have to live together and get along together. And then knowledge, if we have a natural inclination toward the truth, but people lie to us, then they're in violation of natural law because we have this thirst, this desire to know, which is why lying has got to be bad, because lying goes against that natural inclination that we have for knowledge and truth.